Okay, it is my incredible zchus to be able to introduce Rabbi Aschi Dick. Rabbi Aschi is a popular Jerusalem-based Torah educator whose OUisrael classes, including the From Halachic Controversy to Contemporary Norms series and weekly presentations to the Modi'in Kol HaBoker and Modi'in Area Lunch and Learn, focus on contemporary halacha and Jewish thought. He's the author of Halachic Responsa, published as Shut Ishei Yisrael, which has been cited by Rav Hershel Schachter and has the Haskam, at least the most recent volumes of Rav Schachter. His recorded shiurim address topics such as Dina de Malchusa, Heter Mechira, brain death, all the very simple sugyas. And Rav Aschi, as he will not disappoint this evening, is going to take on yet another complicated and very sensitive topic in halacha, and that's a topic of posthumous insemination and progeny for Israel's fallen heroes. Rabbi Dick's shiur this evening has generously been dedicated anonymously in honor of the tireless work of the OU staff and the outstanding OU Magidei Shiurim. It is a great zchus to introduce Rabbi Aschi Dick.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Rabbi Sam, and the incredible staff of the OU. If I had more time, I would try to do that thank you justice. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, a pleasure to see all of you, some familiar faces. Rabbi Sam, you're absolutely correct. A very complicated, technical, and very sensitive topic. This reference sheet that you have before you has approximately 100 sources. I have to confess that when I put together the source sheet, it came out to 200 sources. I said, I can't do this. I'm going to obviously have a wide-ranging audience, different levels of scholarship. Some people have had a yeshiva education, some people have not. I will try my best to make it inspirational and try to draw some conclusions despite the technical difficulty and the sensitivity of this topic. It's a very appropriate title for the shiur, Our Fallen Heroes. I want to just preface by quoting the Shut HaMaril. The Maril was the leader of German Jewry, 14th century. He quotes a Marami Rudenberg. Marami Rudenberg you may be familiar with. He was put up for ransom and he refused to be taken out of a prison. He died al Kiddush Hashem. So the Maharil quotes the Marami Rudenberg as having given the psak that if somebody dies al Kiddush Hashem, dying to sanctify the name of Hashem, no Kaddish is necessary. The Maharil writes, presumably the reason is because since they're so holy, no Kaddish is necessary. The Kaddish is to uplift the soul, to sanctify the soul, but if somebody dies al Kiddush Hashem, there's nothing greater than that, and there's no way that Kaddish could be said. I would not say that this is halacha l'mais. I wouldn't say that we should now not say Kaddish for anybody who died al Kiddush Hashem. The Maril disagrees. He says there's always greater levels that the neshama, that the Jewish soul could rise to. However, I think that the opinion of the Marami Rudenberg definitely illustrates a very moving point. Oftentimes people will begin the shiur by saying this is li'ilu nishmas, this is for the elevation of the fallen soldiers. For me, I rarely say that, not because the thought and the sentiment doesn't resonate with me, but because I feel that these soldiers are so great, I don't think that they need an ilu neshama. If anything, we should be zocha, thinking about their heroism, that we should have an ilu neshama, that we can learn from their ways, and that we, the living, could elevate our neshamas. Like Rav Hutner used to say to people, oh, you're making aliyah. So he says, may the aliyah have a neshama, okay? So that's just a bit of a preface. Now, so part of the issue that illustrates the tragedy is the issue tonight, posthumous insemination. A lot of these soldiers are dying childless. It's absolutely heart-wrenching. I have mentioned to the attendees of my various shiurim that it's difficult for me to make the trip from Har Nof to Talbia or to Rechavia or wherever else I'm giving the shiur, because along the way I am seeing pictures of hostages and pictures of fallen soldiers. So we're living in very difficult times. There are many mixed emotions because Rabbi Gold, Olav Shalom, used to say that if I want to see Hashem, I go to Shuk Machane Yehuda. OUisrael is coming alive, but there are a lot of birth pangs. Okay, we're in the process of the birth of the Geula, of the redemption. All of OUisrael is coming back, but the birth pangs are difficult to deal with. So a lot of mixed feelings. This issue, again, as I said, highlights the issue of young soldiers dying, leaving young widows. And there have been cases already where the widow requests to be impregnated posthumously using the seed of her late husband. And this has raised a stormy controversy. The newspaper Besheva has already run at least 3 or 4 articles. Some rabbis are saying that this is a good thing. Some rabbis are saying that this is something problematic. Some of the popular arguments is that how can you bring a child into the world if he's going to be born an orphan? One rabbi that thought that this was a compelling argument was Rav Nachum Rabinovich. Rav Zalman Nechemia Goldberg, Olav Shalom, rejected the argument. He said, we don't make up prohibitions that have not been codified in Jewish law or that do not find a solid source in Jewish law. He gave a very humorous mashal from the Dubna Magid. The Dubna Magid quotes the Mishnah in Avos that we know, Al Karchach Atanoilad, you are born without having chosen to be born. Al Karchach Ata Meis, you will leave this world whether you like it or whether you don't. But Al Karchach, against your will, you're going to have to give a din v'cheshbon, an accounting after your passing. How did you live your life? Were you a good person? Were you an honest person, a loving person? So the Dubna Magid gives a mashal, a parable. In town, in the shtetl, you had a blind man and a deaf man, and a renowned doctor came to town. It was told that this doctor could cure the blind and could cure the deaf. So these 2 men ran to the doctor. But here was the catch. The blind man had a wife who was not very pretty. Okay? She had other qualities, but that was not her quality. But she was a sweetheart. Okay? And the blind man was very happily married. The deaf man had a beauty queen as a wife, but she used to scream a lot. But he was very happy, couldn't hear her. The blind man is cured, now he can see. The deaf man is cured, now he can hear. And their lives become miserable. Because the blind man is looking at his wife and says, oy vey, right? Who did I marry? The deaf man starts to hear his wife's screaming all the time. He says, oy vey, I can't handle this. So they take the doctor to a din Torah, and they say, look, you cured us, but you turned our lives into hell, so we don't want to pay you, or we want a refund. So the doctor said, fair enough, no problem. I'll give you a full refund, but you, the blind man, I'm going to make you blind again, and you, the deaf man, I'm going to make you deaf again. And they said, no, thank you. So the rabbi said, okay, thank you very much, you pay your dues. Okay? In other words, basically, you prefer to be able to see, you prefer to be able to hear. And Rabbi Zalman Nechemia Goldberg uses this mashal to explain why if somebody's born and wants to live, you can't say that his birth was not meaningful, that his birth was not desirable, just because he is born into circumstances that are not ideal. The fact is that if any of these orphans were born, surely they would wish to live, under normal circumstances. So Reb Zalman Nechemia Goldberg does not find merit in that argument. There have been other issues that have been raised regarding the issue of kavod hamet. Is it respectful to the body if they need to extract the seed, the sperm, posthumously? Is that a disrespect to the body of the mace? Some people have argued it's disrespectful. Some have argued it's not disrespectful. Again, there was a story written in Rabbi Gorin, Rabbi Shlomo Gorin, the unforgettable chief rabbi of Israel and chief rabbi of the IDF. He has a beautiful book of memoirs called Ba'oz B'Gvura. I encourage everybody to go out and buy the book if you haven't yet done so. It's a very nice work. And in one of the chapters there, he describes how shortly, or actually in the midst of the 1948 War of Independence, he managed to attain permission from the Jordanians to go behind enemy lines to retrieve the bodies of the Kedoshim, the fallen soldiers from Gush Katif, the Lamed Vav, those great soldiers. And Rabbi Gorin said he managed to get behind the enemy lines, and there was a lot of work. He had to get the bodies of those fallen soldiers and put their bones in the caskets, and he tried to line up the bones as respectfully as he could. And he saw that the coffins were being shifted, were being moved around, and the bones got jumbled. And as the day came to the end, he broke down crying because he felt that he may have acted in a way that could have accorded more respect to these fallen soldiers. He said that he had a minhag. Rabbi Gorin used to learn the 7 daf, or 7.5 daf, from the Talmud Bavli, another 7.5 daf from the Talmud Yerushalayim, so that he could finish all of Shas every year. Now, he was a busy man. He was going behind enemy lines trying to get back bodies of soldiers. He was a general in the army. He had the entire IDF to run. So he says he had a little Gemara, a Bavli and a Yerushalmi, and when he was on the Jeep, he would learn those Gemaras, those blot Gemaras. If any of you think that Daf Yomi is too challenging, okay, he used to learn 7 daf of Bavli, 7 daf of Yerushalmi, and that day was no exception. After having worked the entire day to get the bodies into the coffins, he sat down to learn his 7 daf of Bavli and his 7 daf of Yerushalmi, and then he was learning Mesachet Shkalim. Now, it's quoted in the reference sheet. I think if you want to see, I will apologize that the reference sheet will be jumping around a little bit tonight because we don't have time to go through all the references. That will be your homework. 71 in the reference sheet, the Mishnah in Shkalim talks about which vessels found in Jerusalem could be assumed to be tahor, could be assumed to be ritually pure, and which vessels have to be assumed as being non-pure, okay, as being impure. And the Gemara says all vessels, you can assume they're pure. Again, purity and impurity was a major issue in those times. If you go to the southern excavations or almost anywhere else in Israel, Masada, you name it, you will see mikvaot, ritual baths everywhere, because everybody needed a ritual bath if you wanted to eat from the karbanot. If you were a Kohen, you needed to be pure all the time so that you can eat from truma. And anyways, anybody who was considered a chaver, who was considered a pious, religious person, would always try to be pure whenever he could. So that was a major part of life. Today, obviously, it is not such a central part of our lives, but back then it was. So you can assume that any vessel that is found, you can assume that it had been immersed in a mikvah. You can assume that that vessel is pure. People don't allow non-pure utensils lying around. So the exception is these 3 vessels, the sal, the basket, the magrefa, and the maritza. Now, these are utensils or vessels that are used for transporting the bones of the deceased. The Yerushalmi tells us they used to bury the deceased in one location, and then when the body decomposed, they would take the bones and transport it to the ancestral burial plot. So these were vessels that were used for transporting the bones. The sal is a basket. They used to carry the bones in the basket. A greifa is a kind of a shovel that they used to use for moving the bones from one vessel to the other vessel, and the maritza. Now there's a little bit of ambiguity. What does the maritza mean? And we'll quote the opinion of the Rambam in his parish of Mishnayos, which is number 72 in the reference sheet, where the Rambam describes how this maritza would be used for breaking the bones of the deceased so that they could get into the basket. That is also the explanation of the Meiri, number 73, and number 74, Rabbi Ovadia Mibar Tenura. The Tiferes Yisrael, number 75 in this reference sheet, finds this explanation extremely perplexing. He says, you're not allowed to break the bones of somebody who's passed away. That's not respectful to the mace. It's not respectful to the corpse. Why on earth were they breaking the bones of the deceased? So, number 76 in the reference sheet, which is the Radvaz, Rabbi David ibn Ezra, who was the head of the Beis in Alexandria approximately 500 years ago, he says the reason why it's permitted to do so, again, the Tiferes Yisrael lived 3 centuries after the Radvaz. So he didn't see the Radvaz, but had he seen this Radvaz, he would have not had this difficulty. The Radvaz, and I put those points in bold. He says, Matirin l'ratzeis ha'atzamot, we're allowed to break those bones, l'holicham mimakom lamakom, to take them from one location to the next. V'stama de milso, we can assume lo'hoya osim kain, they wouldn't do so ela l'chvod shalmeis, just because it was necessary to give kavod, to give honor to the deceased, because it is the honor of the deceased to be able to be buried in his ancestral plot. So therefore we have permission to even break the bones if that's what gives honor to the deceased. Rabbi Gorin learned this Mishnah. He came across this piece of Talmud on the evening after he had spent the day transporting the bones of these fallen heroes, after having broken down crying because he felt that he maybe didn't treat them with enough respect. And this is the Mishnah. This is the piece of Talmud that Rabbi Gorin came across. And he said that was a sign from heaven that told him what you're doing is approved of in heaven, that you're doing the right thing, and the fact that the bones shifted around or may have been not treated with as much respect as Rabbi Gorin had hoped for, there's nothing to worry about. He was doing this work, l'shem shamayim. So how does this relate to our topic tonight? Sometimes, according to certain claims, sometimes maybe even a certain body part of testicle might have to be removed from the deceased soldier in order to improve the chances of inseminating the deceased. So some people say that's not allowed. You're not allowed to do that. Well, if it gives honor to the deceased, then it's okay. The Nachal Eshkol says that the greatest honor that you can give to a person is by giving him progeny. Okay, and that's the title of tonight's shir, progeny and legacy for Israel's fallen heroes. Okay, yeah, insemination and progeny for Israel's fallen heroes. So we have a lot of Talmudic sources. I can provide them with you, but we don't exactly have the time. But it's certainly logical that to give somebody who has passed away, to give progeny, to give him continuity so that his name will carry on, that is the kavod, that is the honor of the mace. And we have a very compelling case coming from this Mishnah that we learned about breaking the bones of the deceased in order to give them honor. By that same token, we should be allowed to even remove a body part if necessary in order to give honor to these great people. So I think that this issue is really a non-starter. I've written to Posthumous, they accept my argument, they agree, and there are many more proofs to this. So one issue that was raised about bringing a child into the world as an orphan, that's something very subjective. It should be the choice of the parent. It should be choice of the mother. We don't have any source for that. Rabbi Zalman Nehemiah Goldberg rejects that argument with his humorous mashal, which actually explains the Mishnah, which says, Al karchach ata notzar, you are created against your will, you pass away against your will, and you're going to have to give a din v'cheshbon. Why? Because a person could get up there and say, God, you didn't ask me if I want to be born, so you can't hold me accountable for my actions. He says, did you want to live? Every Rosh Hashanah, every Yom Kippur, you said, Zachreinu l'chaim, remember us for life. Most people, Baruch Hashem, do want to live. So if you wanted to live, you can't claim, Hashem, you didn't give me a choice about being born or not. You wanted to live, so therefore you also have to give an accounting for your actions. The same way that these two people, this deaf person, this blind person, would have to pay the doctor because that's what they wanted. If you wanted to see and you wanted to hear, you can't complain that your life deteriorated as a result of being cured. Okay? Now, there's one halachic issue, and this is going to be the most technical part of the shir. So I'm going to try to simplify it as much as we could, but bear with me, okay? Number one in the reference sheet This is a very bizarre account in the Talmud. As we know, the Kohen Gadol needs to marry a Betula, a virgin. And the Gemara discusses the bizarre case in Chagiga Daf Yudalid Amud Beis about a woman getting pregnant in the bath. Okay, now scientifically, that's probably close to impossible. I don't know if there is any recorded medical case of a woman getting pregnant in this way. The Rashbates, who was the chief rabbi of Northern Africa 800 years ago, claims that this did happen in his community. He was even asked about it. So it's probably extremely unlikely, but actually the discussion has great ramifications for the whole topic of IVF, in vitro fertilization, and the topic that we're addressing tonight. The Gemara discusses about a woman getting pregnant in the bath, but she's still a virgin. So can she marry a Kohen Gadol? The conclusion of the Gemara is that she's still a virgin. She's allowed to marry the high priest, the Kohen Gadol. Okay? Number two, okay, I know this is going to get a little bit more bizarre. The Bach in Yarden, Siman Kuf Tzadihei, quotes a Rabbeinu Peretz. Rabbeinu Peretz was a French scholar from the Rishonim, at the end of the period of the Rishonim. And he says that a woman should be careful about lying on a bedsheet where another man lied, because she might get pregnant. Okay, I know this sounds even more bizarre than the previous case. Now, forget about the scientific probability of such a thing happening. It carries great halachic import, and this is why. Says Rabbeinu Peretz, if a woman gets pregnant and she's under the assumption that she got pregnant from her husband, but she really didn't get pregnant from her husband, she got pregnant from another man because she lied on his bedsheet, okay? Excuse the bizarre and sensitive nature of this topic. We have a problem. She's going to give birth to a child, let's say a girl. Comes time for shidduchim. She's going to find a nice boy. They're going to get engaged. She may not be under the impression that that boy to whom she got engaged is actually her brother. Why? Because that is the son of that anonymous sperm donor, okay, who actually unintentionally impregnated this woman's mother. So this boy and girl, who are brothers and sisters, are going to get married. Okay, that's the unbelievable proposition coming from the Rabbeinu Peretz. Now, why does this have relevance? Because it tells us the first step in understanding this complicated halachic issue, that is, that a person is considered the halachic father, whether he impregnated his wife through natural means, the common way of impregnating a woman, or if it was done in vitro, or not through a unification, not through relations between a husband and a wife. So he still has the status of a halachic father. Why? Because this point was debated, right? Because some rabbis did come along and say, hey, we know biologically the father is whoever provided, or from the person from whom the sperm was extracted. We don't have any questions about who the biological father is, but who is the halachic father? Maybe in halacha you need to have a child through the common way of having a child, a unification between a man and a wife. Maybe that's what you need in order for somebody to have the status as the halachic father. Comes Rabbeinu Peretz through this very bizarre case and tells us, no, you have the status of the halachic father, even if the pregnancy did not come as a result of intercourse. Okay, is that clear so far? Okay, let's move on. Here we get a case from the Noda B'Yehuda. Tragic case. Number 3 in the reference sheet. There was a woman from the Kehila of Gidong. I don't know where that is. Not relevant for tonight's discussion. Unfortunately, her husband was ill and passed away. Now, this was a young couple, married for 7 years. They did not have children. And then, after her husband dies, she gets pregnant. And 9 months exactly after her husband's death, she gives birth to a beautiful baby girl. Okay? Now, rumors start to arise. How did this woman get pregnant? So she says, well, I went to mikvah. I had relations with my husband on the 28th day of ER. He passed away on the 29th day of ER. So rumors started to, people were whispering. He was on his deathbed. He was surrounded with people. How did you have a moment to be intimate with your husband? And you weren't able to get pregnant for 7 years, and all of a sudden you managed to get pregnant. And not only that, we saw you go into the carriage, the agala, and there was a young man there, and maybe he was the one that made you pregnant. Now, why was this so important? Not just because we wanted to know if the daughter was the biological daughter of this deceased man, because this man died and left one brother who was 3 years old. Now, as we know, there's an obligation of chalitza, that if a man dies childless, there has to be a chalitza or a yibum performed by the brother of the deceased childless man. Okay? Now, there's one brother, he's 3 years old. In order for him to perform a kosher chalitza, you have to wait to the age of 13. That means this poor woman is going to have to remain an aguna for 10 years until her husband's only brother grows up so that he can do chalitza. So she says, I don't need to do chalitza because my late husband gave me this beautiful baby girl. And they said, well, I think you do need to do chalitza because your late husband doesn't have offspring. That little girl came from the boy in the carriage. Okay? So they send the shaila to the Noda B'Yehuda. The Noda B'Yehuda says, leave this woman alone. Right? She's innocent. All those claims made against her are totally unfounded. So she went into a carriage with a boy. For heaven's sake, you're not going to question the cheskat kashrut, the presumption of innocence, just because a woman once went into a carriage where there was a guy there. So forget about it. He says he was on the deathbed. So what? Okay, that doesn't mean that he could not have impregnated her, especially if she made efforts to become pregnant, so that she shouldn't have to wait 10 years for her husband's only brother to make her pregnant, and for her husband's only brother to either perform yibum or chalitza. So the Noda B'Yehuda says this woman is innocent, leave her alone. Anybody who makes any claims that this little girl of hers did not come from her deceased husband is being motzi shemra. We talked in the previous shir about the importance of lashon hara and how words can damage. And as you can imagine, this woman, after having lost her husband, right, is obviously grief-stricken, and now she has to deal with libel. So the Noda B'Yehuda says, I want these rumors to cease immediately. Says the Noda B'Yehuda, however, I have another issue. She went to mikvah, she had relations with her husband on the 28th of ER. The husband dies on the 29th of ER. She says the inception may have occurred only after the death of her husband. Okay? A sperm could remain viable for up to 3 days, according to the rabbi. Science says 3 days, maybe in rare circumstances up to 5 days. She may have had her ovulation even after her husband died, and there may have been a unification with the ovum and the sperm after her husband was dead. That means that when the husband died, there was no offspring. Now, he says, I have no doubt that this girl is the halachic child of the deceased man. In other words, she's entitled to her father's inheritance, or her inheritance. She's entitled to her father's estate. That I have no doubt about. She is definitely the halachic child. He says that I have no questions about. But maybe there still is an obligation to perform chalitza because at the time of the death, there was no offspring. Are we following this? I see some faces. Rabbi, I need a watch. I don't know what time it is. I have 10 minutes? 15 minutes, great. I'm going to give the most complicated topic in halacha I ever gave in 15 minutes. Yeah. Correct? Says the Noda B'Yehuda, it was a very nice theory of mine, but it's wrong, okay? Because the only thing that the Torah really cares about is when you get to the final chapter of this story, when you look at the end result, has this man left offspring, yes or no? So even though when he died, he was totally childless, but the fact is that eventually we come to know that this man has offspring, so therefore there is no obligation of Yibum and Chalitza. And that has been the unanimous opinion of all the poskim. Everybody accepts the final ruling of the Noda B'Yehuda, meaning to say everybody agrees that the Noda B'Yehuda's clever argument, or his clever Hava Amina, is incorrect. Okay? So therefore, the Torah cares, does this man have offspring? Does this man not have offspring? We don't look at the time of the death, but we look at what eventually happens. Okay? And there's a lot of proofs to that. They're very complicated. Maybe I'll try to illustrate one of the proofs. Okay? I'll bring one proof that isn't very compelling, but it's a very clever proof. We know that Boaz lived with Ruth. Right? The Medrash tells us that Boaz died the very night that he lived with Ruth. And the Torah tells us, Lo Yasser Shevet mi Yehuda, the king of Judah has to be from the offspring of Yehuda.
What?
The Torah tells us that the king of Israel has to, or the king of Judah has to come from the offspring of Yehuda. Lo Yasser Shevet mi Yehuda. Okay? So David had to be from the offspring of Yehuda. Boaz was a descendant of Yehuda. David was a descendant of Boaz. Boaz lived with Ruth. They had the child Oved, who had the child Yishai, who had the child David. So you see that even though the conception may have happened after Boaz's death, Boaz lived with Ruth and died that very night, you still see that David is considered the halachic offspring of Boaz, and you see there was no obligation of Yibum and Chalitza. Okay, so that's a kind of an interesting proof. It's not the best proof in the world, but it definitely is a very interesting proof. Okay? Now, I want to move to part 3 of the shir. Okay, this is going to be the most difficult part of the shir. I hope so far things have been clear. Number 17 in the reference sheet. Hakones et yivimto. If the Yibum rite is actually performed, somebody marries the widow of his deceased brother, so he's entitled to the entire inheritance. Okay? That's what the Mishnah tells us. It says, Yakum al Shem Achiv, the Torah tells us, which means to say not only does he take the widow to build the legacy of his deceased brother, he also is entitled to the entire estate of his deceased brother. The Gemara explains, as we said, Yakum al Shem Achiv Amar Chmana v'harei kam. Now, that was the argument of the daughters of Tzlafchad. If you recall, Rashi quoting the Gemara in Bava Batra, that the Bnot Tzlafchad said, look, if we're considered offspring, to exempt our mother from having to perform Yibum and Chalitza, meaning to say our father, Tzlafchad, is considered to have left offspring because we're alive, because we live. So, therefore, we should also receive the inheritance. That's what they're saying. We should also get a portion in the land of Israel because of our father Tzlafchad. So what's coming very clear is that the whole issue of taking the inheritance, of being an heir, being a child, being a halachic child, and the obligation of Yibum Chalitza are mutually inclusive. They are completely interdependent. You cannot have a reality where somebody has a halachic offspring, and as we said, it's unanimous, and even the Noda B'Yehuda agrees that even if a child is conceived after the death of his parent, he's still considered the halachic offspring, and he will be entitled to inherit his late father, who he never met. In fact, he was conceived after his father had passed away, but he's still the halachic heir. He's entitled to his father's inheritance. That means that he must also have the capacity to exempt his mother from the obligation of Yibum Chalitza, because inheritance and the obligation of Yibum Chalitza are two halachic realities that are completely mutually inclusive, which means to say that if the woman conceives after the death and she gives birth to a child, this child is the halachic offspring of the late man. The child is going to inherit his late father. That means he also has the capacity to exempt his mother from Chalitza. So therefore, I make the argument, and a number of rabbis have agreed with me, a number of rabbis have disagreed with me, that if a woman is posthumously inseminated, which is an issue that we deal with today, because there has been a number of requests coming from the widows of fallen IDF soldiers to be impregnated with her husband's sperm that have been frozen, that have been preserved. So just as those children will inherit their father, those children will also exempt their mother from chalitza. Okay, that's the argument. I'm giving you just a few proofs, but there's a very long discussion we can get into, but we don't have the time. Is this clear so far? Would anybody like to ask any questions? Organ donations.
You're allowed to organ donate.
Correct.
Why couldn't you be allowed to donate his sperm as a sort of organ to one?
Yeah, we have no issue. I maintain the humble position that it is permissible to impregnate the one posthumously if that was the express wish of the deceased soldier, and that is also the wish of the almanah. Rav Zalman Chaim Goldberg says as long as we can establish a compelling case that this fallen soldier would have liked his seed to be used posthumously, and that is also the desire of the widow, so there is no problem with that. We don't have any halachic issues with it. Some people raise the issue of a child being born into orphanhood. We already discussed that. That's not an issue according to Zalman Chaim Goldberg. We discussed the problem of kavod hamet. Is it considered disrespectful to the body to extract the sperm posthumously? We'll get into that discussion if we have time. But we're saying that no, anything that's done to give honor to the deceased is something which is permissible and encouraged in halacha. Okay? Here comes the issue. Until now, we've discussed a case where the soldier donated his sperm while he was still alive, which means to say that the sperm came from a living body. Are we going to distinguish that with a case where the sperm was taken from a dead body, where the sperm was extracted after the man died? There are a number of poskim that would like to make that distinction. I heard that I think Rabbi Yaakov Ariel wants to make that argument that yes, I will acknowledge that if the sperm was donated during the man's lifetime, I will agree that that child is the halachic offspring. We're making the argument here tonight that he would also have the capacity to exempt his mother from the obligation of chalitza. The question is, do we distinguish that with a case where the sperm was taken from a dead body? Some say no, if it was taken from a dead body, so he wasn't alive. So as a person who was not alive, he didn't have that halachic capacity to confer his offspring or his status as the father to the sperm. Is this argument clear? Okay. I made the argument that there is no such distinction. I wrote to a very important post who lives in London. He's the author of the Archasach Lemdeni. He agreed with me that there is no such distinction. I brought a proof. Some people very strongly disagree with his proof, including my own Rosh Hashiva, but I'm going to present the proof right here. A girl, if she was seduced, excuse the sensitive nature of this topic. I tried to say it in the most respectful way, but if a girl was seduced under the age of 12 and a half, so I know a bit controversial in today's terms, but back then the Torah considers the age of majority 12 and a half. So if she was seduced, the seducer has to pay a penalty. Now, if the penalty is collected before the age of 12 and a half, since she is under the jurisdiction of her father, her father is her guardian, so therefore the father takes the knas, the father takes the penalty. But if the penalty is paid after the age of 12 and a half, the girl is entitled to the knas. Now the Gemara raises an issue, what happens if the girl died? Okay, so, and had she been alive, she would have reached the age of 12 and a half. Okay, so in other words, by the time the penalty was leveled and collected, the girl is no longer alive, but had she been alive, she would have been 12 and a half. So that's the Chakira, the Talmudic discussion of Yesh Beger Bekever. Now, how do you define Bagrut? How do you find reaching the age of majority? Does that mean that you have been born 12 and a half years ago? Or does that mean you have been alive for 12 and a half years? And the nafkamina would be if this girl was born 12 and a half years ago, but she's not alive, so she hasn't lived for 12 and a half years. It's a discussion, how do you define Bagrut? But one thing is certain, and I extract the following principle. Even if somebody's not alive anymore, that doesn't mean that his reality doesn't affect what's going on in this world, and doesn't mean that his status doesn't have halachic relevance in this world. If the Gemara entertained the possibility that a girl could be considered to have reached the age of majority even though she's not currently alive. But had she been alive, she would have reached the age of 12 and a half, and therefore it's considered her knas and not her father's knas. So therefore, even if a man has passed away, there's no reason why he should not be able to confer the status of fatherhood or receive the status of fatherhood. Are we following the argument? Okay, so that's the argument I make. In my humble opinion, I don't think there's such a distinction to be made. I'm going to figure how much time do we have, Rabbi Sam? Huh? Okay, so I'm just going to figure out. There's a major issue. In Yevamot, Lamed He Amud Beis, Reish Lakish teaches us an important principle, that chalitza is invalidated until you know the final verdict, until the final result is known, meaning to say, until you know with absolute certainty whether this man is going to leave offspring or not, the chalitza is pasul. So therefore, if a woman was pregnant and the whole situation was pending, her husband dies childless, but she's pregnant, okay, in halacha, we don't view a fetus as a nefesh. Okay, abortion in Judaism is forbidden because it's a form of self-injury. We agree with the progressive argument that it's a woman's body. A fetus is a woman's body, yerach ima, we agree with them. Where we disagree with them is that they say if it's a woman's body, she can do what she wants. Our argument is that you can't do what you want with your own body, and abortion is a form of self-injury. So it's your body, but if you abort, you're considered to be engaging in a form of self-injury. So we don't view a fetus as a nefesh, so therefore a fetus in a woman's womb should not really have the status, and doesn't really have the status to exempt her mother from chalitza. The fetus is not considered to be causing the late father to have left offspring, but the situation is pending. We have to wait and see, is this child going to be a viable child? Is this woman going to carry out with a full pregnancy? And Reish Lakish teaches us a principle in Yevamos Lamed He Amud Beis, that so long as the reality is pending, we don't know yet, is this person going to have offspring in the world, or is this person not going to have offspring in this world? We need to wait and see. The Torah teaches us ayin alav. There's a special scriptural understanding that teaches us you have to wait until there's finality, until you know exactly whether this person is going to leave offspring. And therefore, I'm making a very provocative halachic argument tonight, and a lot of people disagree with me, that as long as there's a sperm sitting in a freezer, frozen, that continues to have this situation pending, it keeps us in a situation of doubt. We don't know whether or not this man is going to have offspring or not. There's a sperm in the freezer. We might take that sperm and we might impregnate his widow. We don't know if this man is going to have offspring or not. That would invalidate the chalitza. In ancient times, it took 9 months at most to know if this man was going to leave offspring. Today, thanks to modern medical technology, it could take years until we know if a man is going to leave offspring if his sperm is somewhere in a freezer. We follow that? So this is a major halachic issue. Nobody has raised this issue, and I'm engaged right now with written correspondences with the Gedolei Poskim about this issue, that in ancient times we said we have to wait until we know with absolute certainty, and until we know irreversibly that this man is not going to leave offspring. That took 9 months in ancient times. Today, it could take years. This is a major halachic issue that I'm raising tonight, and there's a lot of discussion about it. I'm just raising a new issue here. It's up for discussion, and I'm happy to do so if any of you are interested. In any case, again, as I began this year, in my humble opinion, the fallen soldiers are so holy. I'm moved by the argument of the Rabbi Rudenberg that if somebody dies al Kiddush Hashem, he doesn't need Kaddish. We don't paskin that way halacha l'maisa, but that was the position of the Rabbi Rudenberg. So the soldiers don't need an Ilu Neshama as much as anybody. They're the ones that need that Ilu Neshama less than anyone else because their souls are so holy. But I will dedicate every word of Torah that's learned tonight and every prayer that's made, that we should not hear any more of any fallen soldiers. Okay, that is my most heartfelt prayer, and the prayer of everyone in this room, that we should not hear a single case of any more soldiers. That is enough. We've seen it. There will be no more fallen soldiers, and we'll see the hostages, and all of Am Yisrael will have every Yeshua that they need. That's our heartfelt prayer. Ashana Tova. Thank you.